It was a Saturday morning, and as usual, Greg found himself at the local grocery store, pushing a cart with one wobbly wheel. He wasn't sure why grocery carts were always like this. Was there a secret society of cart manufacturers who made it their mission to ensure one wheel would inevitably misbehave? As Greg maneuvered his wonky cart down the cereal aisle, he was confronted by the great paradox of modern life: too many choices. He stared at the rows of cereals, ranging from the overly healthy to the absurdly sugary. What was the right choice? He picked up a box of fiber flakes and then quickly swapped it for Choco Explosion Puffs. After all, life was too short to pretend he liked cardboard in a bowl. Further down the aisle, Greg spotted the lady who always seemed to pop up at the most inconvenient moments, Mrs. Hargrove. She was that neighbor who managed to turn every small talk into an Olympic sport. Before he could escape, she was upon him, launching into a detailed description of her cat's dietary habits. Greg nodded along, wondering if there was a socially acceptable way to flee from a conversation about Mr. Fluffy's preference for grain-free kibble. Finally breaking free from Mrs. Hargrove's monologue, Greg made his way to the checkout line. Here, the true test of patience awaited him. The line was long, and there was a clear divide. Those who had meticulously organized their carts, and those who seemed to have just thrown in items in a fit of chaos. Greg, of course, was part of the latter group. The person in front of him was paying with a check. A check. Greg hadn't seen anyone pay with a check since the early 2000s. He watched in disbelief as the cashier processed it, slowly, oh so slowly, tearing it off from the booklet, then painstakingly entering it into the system. When it was finally his turn, Greg realized he had forgotten to bring his reusable bags. Again. The cashier gave him that look, the look that said, "You care about the environment, right?" He sheepishly opted for plastic, promising himself he'd do better next time, knowing full well he wouldn't. As he packed up his groceries and wheeled his rebellious cart out to the parking lot, Greg couldn't help but laugh. Here he was, battling a wayward cart, engaging in cat kibble discussions, and getting judged for plastic bags. It was all so absurd and yet so perfectly normal. With his groceries finally loaded into the car, Greg sat behind the wheel for a moment and thought, "Is this what life is?" And so Greg continued with his day, embracing the quirks and absurdities that seem to weave themselves into the fabric of everyday life. But here's a question for you. Have you ever stopped to laugh at the small, ridiculous moments in your own day? Maybe life isn't about avoiding the absurdities, but finding the humor in them. What's your funniest everyday quirk?